Hello and welcome back to Kimber Gaines' Continue with Misery, Chapter 6. Under clouds that still raced east to west, blacker shapes against a black sky, and a moon that was now settling toward the horizon, the pony trap sped toward the churchyard. It was now Mrs. Ramage who drove, cracking the whip over the bewildered Mary, who would have told them, if horses could talk, that this was all wrong. She was supposed to be dozing in her warm stall come this time of night. The spade and the pink chattered coldly against one another, and the Ramage, even though they would have given anyone who had seen them a proper fright. They must have looked like a pair of Dickens resurrection men, or perhaps one resurrection, many sitting in a pony trap driven by a ghost. For she was all in white, and had not even paused long enough to gather her robe. Her nightgown fluttered around her stout, vein-puffed ankles, and the tails of her cap streamed wildly beyond her. Here was the church. She turned up Mary and Lane, which ran beside it, shivering at the ghostly sound of the wind playing along the eaves. She had a moment in wonder why such a holy place as a church should seem so frightening after dark. And then she realized it was not the church, it was the errand. First thought about coming out of her faint was that my Lord must help them. Hadn't he been there in all things, through thick and thin, never wavering? A moment later she had realized how mad the idea was. This was not a matter of my Lord's courage, but of his very sanity. She didn't need Mr. Geoffrey to tell her so. The memory of Mrs. Evelyn Hyde had done that. She realized that neither Mr. Geoffrey nor my Lord had been in Little Dunthorpe when it had happened. This had almost been a year and a half ago in the spring. Misery had entered the summer of her pregnancy, morning sickness behind her, the final rising of her belly, and its attendant discomfort still ahead, and she had cheerfully sent the two men off for a week of a grouse shooting and card playing footballing in heaven alone knew what other masculine foolishness at Oak Hall and Doncaster. My Lord had been doubtful, but Misery assured him she would be fine and nearly pushed him out the door. That Misery would be fine, Mrs. Ramage had no doubt, but whenever my Lord and Mr. Geoffrey left for Doncaster, she wondered if one of them, or perhaps both, might not return on the back of the cart, toes up. Oak Hall was the inheritance of Albert Fossington, a schoolmate of Geoffrey's and Ian's. Mrs. Ramage quite rightly believed that Bertie Fossington was mad. Some 3 years ago, he had eaten his favorite polo pony after it had broken 2 legs and needed to be destroyed. It was a gesture of affection, he said. Learned it from Fuzzy Wuzzy in Cape Town, he said. Griquas, wonderful chaps, put sticks and things in their smoochers. What? Some of them looked like they could carry all 12 volumes of the Royal Navigation charts on their lower lips. Ha ha, taught me that each man must eat the thing he loves. Rather poetic in a grisly sort of way. What? In spite of such bizarre behavior, Mr. Geoffrey and my Lord retained a great affection for Bertie. I wonder if that means they'll have to eat him when he's dead. Mrs. Ramage had once wondered after a visit from Bertie, along which he had tried to play croquet with one of his house cats, quite shattering its poor little head. They had spent nearly 10 days at Oak Hall this past spring. Not more than a day or two after they left, Mrs. Charlotte Evelyn Hyde of Storping on Firekill had been found dead on the back lawn of her home, Covell Birches. There had been a freshly picked bunch of flowers near one outstretched hand. The village doctor was a man named Bilford, a capable man by all accounts. Nevertheless, he had called an old Dr. Shinebone in to consult. Bilford had diagnosed the fatal malady as a heart attack, although the young girl was very young, only 18, and seemed in the pink of health. Bilford was puzzled. Something seemed not at all right. Only Shinny had been clearly puzzled as well, but in the end he with the diagnosis. So did most of the village, for that matter. The girl's heart had not been properly made, that was all. Such things were rare, but everyone could recall such a sad case at the time or another. It was probably the universal concurrence that saved Bilford's practice, if not his head, following the ghastly denouement. Although everyone had agreed that the girl's death was puzzling, it crossed no one's mind that she might not be dead at all. 4 days following the internment, an elderly woman named Mrs. Soames, Mrs. Ramage knew her slightly, had observed something white while lying in the ground of the Congregational Church's cemetery as she entered in the flowers of the grave of her husband, who had died the previous winter. It was much too big to be a flower petal, and she thought it might be a dead bird of some sort. And as she approached, she became more and more sure that the white object was not just lying on the ground, but protruding from it. She came 2 or 3 hesitant steps closer, and yet observed a hand reaching from the earth of a fresh grave, the fingers frozen in a hideous gesture of supplication. Blood-streaked bones protruded from the ends of all the digits save the thumb. Mrs. Soames ran shrieking from the cemetery, ran all the way into Storping's High Street, a run of nearly 1.25 miles, and reported her news to the bobber, who was also the local constable. Then she had collapsed in a dead faint. She took her to bed later that afternoon and did not rise for nearly a month, nor did anyone in the village blame her in the least. The body of the unfortunate Miss Evelyn Hyde had been exhumed, of course, and as Geoffrey Allerburton drew Mary to the front gate leading into Little Dunthorpe C.of.E. churchyard, Mrs. Ramage found herself wishing fervently that she had not listened to the tales of exhumation. They had been dreadful. Dr. Bilford, shaken within an inch of sanity of himself, diagnosed catalepsy. The poor woman had apparently fallen into some sort of death-like trance, which, like those those sort Indian fakers who could voluntarily induce themselves before allowing themselves to be buried alive, or to have needles pass through their flesh. She had remained in this trance for perhaps 48 hours, perhaps 60, long enough at any rate to have been awakened, not to find herself on her back lawn where she had been picking flowers, but buried alive in her own coffin. She had fought grimly for her life, that girl, and Mrs. Ramage found now, following Geoffrey through the gates and into a thin mist that turned into the leaving grave markers into islands, should have redeemed with nobility, only made it seem life more horrid. The girl had been engaged to be married. In her left hand, not the frozen one above the soil, like the hand of a drowned woman, had been in her diamond engagement. With it, she had slit the satin lining in a coffin, and over God knows how many hours she had used it to claw away at the coffin's wooden lid. In the end, ere running out, she had apparently used the billing ring with her hand to cut and excavate, her right hand to dig. It had not been quite enough. Her complexion had been a deep purple, from which her blood-rimmed eyes stared in a bulging expression of terminal horror. The clock in the church tower began to chime the hour 12. The hour when, her mother had told her, the door between life and death swayed open a little bit, and the dead may pass both ways. And it was all Mrs. Ramage could do to keep herself from shrieking and fleeing in a panic that would not abate but would grow stronger with each step. If she began running, she knew she would simply run until she fell down insensible. Stupid, fearful woman, she berated herself, and then amended that. Stupid, fearful, selfish woman. It's my Lord you want to be thinking of now, and not your own fears. My Lord, and if there is one thing to change that, my lady. Ah, no, but it was madness to even think of such a thing. It had been too long. Geoffrey had been led to her Misery's tombstone, and the two of them had been looking down at it as if mesmerized. Lady Calthorpe, the stone read. Other than that, the dates of her birth and death, the only inscription was, loved by many. She looked at Geoffrey and said, like one awakening from a deep daze, "You've not brought the tools." "No, not yet," he responded, and threw full length on the ground and placed his ear against the earth, which was already beginning to show the first tender shoots of grass between the rough, carefully placed sods. For a moment, the only expression she saw there by the lamp she carried was the one Geoffrey had worn since she had first opened the door to him. A look of agonized dread, and then a new expression began to his face. The new expression was one of utter horror mingled with an almost demented hope. He looked at Mrs. Ramage, eyes staring, mouth working. "I believe she lives," he whispered strenuously. "Oh, Mrs. Ramage." Suddenly he turned over onto his belly and screamed at the ground. Under other circumstances, it would have been comic. "Misery, Misery, we're here! We know! Hold on, my darling!" He was on his feet a moment later, springing back toward the pony trap where the digging tools were, his slippery feet sending the planted ground mist into excited little rolls. Mrs. Ramage's knees unlocked, and she buckled forward near the swoon again. On his own accord, seemingly her head slipped onto one of her right ear and was pressed against the ground. She had seen in her similar postures how the railway line, listening for trains. Now she heard it, low, painful scraping sounds of the earth. Not the sounds of a burrowing animal. These were the sounds of two fingers scraping helplessly on the wood. She drew in breath in one great convulsive slip, restarting her own heart. It seemed she had screamed, "We're coming, my lady, praise God, and plead sweet Jesus to be in time. We're coming." She began to pull the half-healed terrors out of the ground with her trembling fingers, and although Geoffrey returned in almost no time, she had already then clawed a hold some 8 inches deep. And that's the end of that chapter. See you later.